Thank you for attending our class on floodplain permitting. Our lecturer today will be Ms. Cheyenne Suneagle. She's an NFIP specialist for the state of Kansas, started working for us in May of last year. She's going to take the CFM test next Wednesday or Thursday. Next Thursday is when it is, on April Fool's Day. So you've got somebody with a year's experience who's been helping people with floodplain full time for that entire year and reading and studying to boot. So she's ready to go. And she's going to explain to you how to fill out a permit form and tips and tricks of the trade.
Okay, thanks, Steve, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning on how to complete a floodplain development permit. I'm Cheyenne Suneagle. Steve said I'm the NFIP specialist, and most of you probably know me. So I'll go ahead and get started here. So I have broken down this permitting process into a basic 9-step process. So first, you want to provide education and outreach to the public. You want to establish an inter-office review process. And then step 3, make sure that you have an adequate permit form. And step 4 is an optional consultation. So these first 4 steps happen before we even start looking at the permits. And then number 5, we're going to check it for completeness and then technical compliance. And then you send it off to your inter-office review process, and then you either approve or deny the permit. And upon approval, you'll be conducting inspections. So when do we need a permit? The basic rule is that all development in the special flood hazard area, which is defined as any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, is going to need a permit. So of course that means constructing new buildings and substantially improving existing structures, but it also means putting in subdivisions or roads, bridges, culverts, anything, filling, grading, excavation, mining. So it's not just building, but really any kind of change that you need. So check in your permit setting that permits are required for all projects that meet the definition of development. So step 1, there's an example in this picture, excuse me, of permits needed for homes. So it's part of your responsibility as a permitting official. So what else do you do as a permitting official? Well, one of the most important things is understanding your regulations at the federal, state, and local level that are applicable to the floodplain, because you'll need to explain them to applicants. You're making sure that they're getting applied for. So how do you inform the public? You can put brochures out in your office or anywhere else in the town that would be able to distribute them. You can write a quick guide and provide guidance that's specific to the ordinance issues. You also have your community websites and social media and that kind of thing, anywhere you can get the word out for public information. So you're also taking enforcement actions, you're investigating complaints and trying to correct violations. Of course, you're processing the permit applications, which is what we're talking about today. You're collecting fees, you're approving and denying the permits, you're ensuring that the projects are built according to the specifications by doing inspections. You're maintaining permit records, all types of certifications, and making sure you have all of those on file. In addition to that, you're keeping your flood maps and data updated and available for public use. Anytime your ordinance is updated, you're going to be updating your administrative forms and that permit application to make sure they match up. And anytime there's a stream alteration or anything like that, you're notifying DWR and your neighboring communities. So step 2 is coordinating your other departments or offices that are going to be part of the inter-office review process. Other people that are going to need to review applications to either distribute their own permits or to sign off that they're compliant with their specific regulations and codes. So that could be a health department, the building department, electrical, emergency services, and zoning. So making sure that those people understand their roles and having this routing procedure so that everyone knows when they're supposed to review something, and you have that turnaround time set up to help you streamline that process, the sign-off procedure. So step 3 is an adequate permit form. So you want to make sure that your permit form is as clear and direct as possible, and you want to make sure that it's being kept updated. So a good permit form will serve as a checklist for information that should accompany the application and have specific instructions for your applicants so that they know what's going to be required of them. So I'll be repeating that a bit throughout the entire presentation, but having that checklist function is really important. So the basic outline of your permit application is having the applicant or developer's information. You need the site location, and then all of your floodplain information is going to be on there. What type of construction or development are they putting in? And then your permit determination, of course. And then your permit form will be telling people what kind of attachments are going to need to be going in with their application, their site plans, site and development plans, and elevation certificates, no-rise certificates, and other certificates that we'll get into. So one thing that you can do is exempt small projects from permitting requirements. So this will help you streamline your permitting process by avoiding having applications that don't really need to be in there. So planting a garden, putting in a mailbox. One thing we see quite often is re-roofing, where they haven't been exempted from needing a permit, but routine maintenance on a roof happens quite frequently and it doesn't really need to be permitted. Why? Because the key here is, will it cause an obstruction to flood flows or alter the drainage or possibly be a substantial improvement? So those are the things that you wouldn't want to exempt. So you're using common sense on what kind of things wouldn't be a problem for those. So be very clear about what the exemptions are. You don't want anyone to think that you're just arbitrarily requiring permits for some things but not other things. You want to be extremely clear about that. So you can put it in your ordinance, or you can put in written administrative procedures. They don't have to be formally adopted, but they're really helpful for avoiding these smaller permits that don't need to be in there. So the last preliminary step before we get to the application is an optional consultation process. So sometimes applicants will contact you to get the floodplain ordinance, or to get a copy of the application. They'll come to you asking questions. So this can be an opportunity for you to sit down with them and go through the requirements and maybe talk a little bit about the project that they want to do. And you can kind of avoid delays or mistakes by explaining what they're going to need and going through all this relevant information that they might need. So some communities have a formal meeting with them. You can preliminarily review the plan, or you can just make it more of an informal conversation. When they come asking questions, you can just sort of have that conversation with them. But this is an optional step that might help you streamline the process a little bit. So the application package, now we've gotten our application from the applicant. So what are we looking for? Well, we need to make sure that the application is complete. So this is just an initial review to make sure that we have everything that we need, because you have a turnaround time, but you can't really review, and your review time, turnaround time doesn't really start until you have a complete application. So you want to check that all the administrative forms are there, they're completely filled out, they're properly signed. You have all the plans that you've asked for that type of development that are attached to the application. You're going to check the setback lines and easements just to make sure that everything is appropriate and it's not glaringly obvious that it's not going to work or be compliant. So you'll want to check for the person's seal. So if it's prepared by a professional, you'll want to look at their license number. And so if anything is left incorrect or left blank, then you'll have to return it to the application and get it corrected. And you can't start the review until that's been corrected. So what else are we looking for? The required certification. So if you're in a floodway, you're going to need a no-rise. If you're floodproofing a non-residential, that needs a certificate. Different elevation certificates. Maybe your community requires under construction elevation certificates in addition to the as-built. So make sure that that's there based on drawings, or if it's under construction. Engineered openings require a certificate. And then of course, not only you, but other agencies have permit requirements. So One of the best ways to avoid a violation with other agencies is to not issue your local permit until you are certain that they have obtained the other required permits. So you can condition your permit, giving it to them that they provide documentation that they've at least applied for the permit, and they're not going to proceed with any part of the project that's affected by that permit until it's been obtained, because sometimes they take a long time, but it's not as effective as just holding off on giving your local permit until those things have been attained. So again, a good permit form should act as a checklist for all the requirements. So you could have a checklist on there for certain types of development that might need a permit from other local or state permits. So if you have wetlands, for example, in your community, you might need a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permit for work in a navigable waterway. And if you're aware of any endangered species in your floodplain, that might be something to consider for ESA compliance, which I'll get to in a minute. And so projects may not require any other permits besides yours, but all of them are going to need a local floodplain permit. So again, other permits that might be required in your local jurisdiction: a septic system, manufactured home park tie-down requirements, health facility, anything around a landfill or storing hazardous materials. So other local and regional agencies that may regulate these certain types of development. So when is a state permit required for DWR? So these are the things that will trigger that kind of permit need. So really anything around a stream, any kind of dam, anything around a levee, repair, dredging, excavation, anything like that. But I would say personally, the most frequently thing that I've seen is fill in the floodplain. Fill going in the floodplain is pretty common. And sometimes putting in a foundation can count as fill. So if you're not sure, definitely check with us if you need a state permit determination, because that's a big one. And then back to the ESA. So undeveloped floodplains sometimes have a rare habitat, and you might need an incidental take permit when a habitat of a species will be taken or impacted by non-federal activity. So the Kansas Wildlife Parks and Tourism website has a list of species by county to be aware of. And so that might help you narrow down where this kind of permit might be required. There should be some new ASA guidance coming soon. But if you need an official determination, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Manhattan Field Office can help your applicant make a determination. There's also information for planning and consulting, a website that kind of generates a letter that says whether or not your work in this area will impact an endangered species. It's not officially accepted by FEMA as a determination. Some people say it's been accepted, but it might just be more of a determination tool to help you determine whether or not that's necessary or not. So here we are, section A of our permit form. So we're going to go through a floodplain permit example where I'm building a new house out here in Lawrence. So section A here has instructions. So each of our sections have instructions that contains important information for the applicant to know. And so this is also where that checklist function comes in, as you'll see. So in the instructions, it says put the name of the applicant or of the developer, but it's preferred for the property owner to be putting their information in. So that's why my name is there. I am the owner of this new building. I applied for it earlier this month. So the floodplain administrator has given me an application number. I've got my made up address in there, my phone number. And since I'm the property owner, I don't have a professional contracting license. So here's my site. So this is out here in East Lawrence, not too far from where I am now. And this is along the Brook Street tributary, which is a tributary to the Kansas River. So you can see the red spot here. That's right next to a confluence with another tributary, and then it joins up with the Kansas River to the north there. So on the right side, you can see where my building footprint's going to be, where I'm going to be putting in fill. So I am here in the AE zone, and I'm just directly adjacent to the floodway there. So section B, location information. So the instructions tell you to put in parcel identification number and a legal description. So I've tried to do that. I have the street address in there, and then, excuse me, I was able to put in the public land surveying system information from the National Flood Hazard Layer, which I'll show you. So I was able to get the section township range, and I wasn't able to find the lot number. But I got at least that much, and if I was really building this house, I would have access to that information. And then I was able to find this tax parcel information from a Douglas County property search site. So your community might have something like that that will help you to verify this kind of information. So this is a national flood hazard layer. So if your community has digital flood mapping, then you have access to this. So I've got all of my floodplain layers here. I've circled my property site. So this is, I believe, the NG911 address site. So I've got that pinpointed. And then next to that, to the left, I've got the public land surveying system layer turned on. So you can see the township range and section. And then it also gives me my map panel and the effective date, which is really convenient to have. So you can download the National Flood Hazard Layer products from Effective Products in the Map Service Center, where you get all of your FEMA mapping products. If you have paper maps, this is also where you would come to get your firm panels and your flood insurance study, whether or not you have digital data. But what's cool about the National Flood Hazard Layer data is that you can download it and put it in a GIS program, which is really helpful. So if I don't have digital data, how do I find my map panel? Well, I've opened the first firm panel, which is the index under effective products. And I know my site is in Eastern Lawrence, so I have a general idea of where the location is. And then they have some landmarks here to help you identify exactly where your site is. So I know that I'm on the Brook Street tributary. So I have that mapped here. I can see the confluence where it meets up with the other tributary and the Kansas River here. So I know that 0178E is the panel that I'm looking for. So I can just scroll down through the firm panels, find that panel, open it and download it, and make a format, which I'll show you in just a second. So once I open the firm panel, I can find my approximate location. So I showed you the cross sections a little bit, so you can see cross sections B and C here, where I know that my site is in between. So there are also sites and these streams and cross sections that can help you find the general approximate location of your site. So once I have my firm panel open, they have a format option, so you can make a close-up map of your area of interest. So they just released this newer version last week, so I went in and redid my format. So you select a page size, whatever you're comfortable with, and then you go down and select your print area. So they give you this green box, you just drag and drop it over the area that you want. And then you'd hit the next button, that blue button on the left, and it would take you down to the scale and north arrow. So it gives you another box to drag and drop over the scale and north arrow, and then over the title block. So you can get all of the information from the firm panel that you want on a much smaller and closer range. So it's easier to work with your specific site of interest. And then you just save it as a PDF or as an image file. So how do I find my exact location if I don't have digital data? So here I've just typed in my site address in a Google search. So it's pinpointed my address location. And now I can just measure where I am from these certain landmarks to help pinpoint my exact location. So I've used East 12th Street and Brook Street to help me get there. So I know I'm going to measure from the center of the street down to my property location. So I know that I'm 161 feet south of East 12th Street. And then I'm 87 feet west of Brook Street. So that's going to help me pinpoint my location. And of course, you could do all of this on paper map as well. So on my Fermet, this is what it looks like, a little bit bigger. So I can use the map scale to measure that. You have the next step. Okay. So yeah, I would view this in actual size or the size that I saved it in to help preserve the map scale. So you want to do that so you don't get any distortion. But I would use my ruler or my Adobe software or whatever software you have it open in to measure that same distance from East 12th Street and Brook Street to get that location. So the next section, what kind of development am I doing? So the instructions here talk about the need for elevation certificates. So you can provide one based on drawings at the start of construction, but underlined, you're also going to need a finished elevation certificate when the project is complete. So that's important to know. So I'm proposing to put in fill and then also a slab on grade house on top of that. And there it is, residential, just single family, single story slab on grade. And so you'll see here, the permit has information about substantial improvement. So if this was an existing structure and I'm adding to it or rehabilitating it or just doing any kind of development to it, is it a substantial improvement? So I have those improvement values there so we can make a determination on that to help with compliance. So here is an excerpt from the substantial damage and improvement desk reference. This is table 61A that kind of goes through the different types of additions or construction that you would do to an existing structure based on whether it's pre-firm or post-firm, what are the compliance needs. So understanding that would be really important for a permitting official. Of course, there's a 50% threshold on substantial improvement and damage. So section E, my map and flood zone information. So the contractor has provided you this application and they filled it out. So you would go to the map service center and either make your Fermet or you have your paper maps and you're going to verify that the panel number is correct, the effective date, the zone is correct. And there's another checklist function here. If it's in a floodway, is there a no right certification attached? Because that's important. And the instructions emphasize that. And that if there is no floodway, if I was in an AE zone with no floodway, that I can't cause more than 1 foot of rise, or if there's already 1 foot of rise, that I can't put a development there. So here's where I'd verify that information. I got my national flood hazard layer up again. So there's that information, and that will help me make sure that the map information is correct. So section F, one of the most important sections is my elevation data. So you're going to want to verify the datum and make sure that all of your datums throughout the application match up, because the two datas, NGVD and NAVD, are very different. And you can't really compare them without doing proper conversions or something. So that is important. And is my elevation certificate probably based on drawings for my proposed structure attached to this application? Well, yes, it should be. So the developer at my site has determined the base flood elevation to be 826.1 and the ground elevation at the site to be 823.9. So I'm proposing to put the lowest floor at 828 because I want a little extra freeboard. That's always the way to go. And I need at least 1 foot, and 2 is always better. And so I've put non-applicable for flood proofing because this is not a non-residential structure, so it doesn't apply. And that my contractor has done a survey in this example. That's how they've done it. But yeah, so having this instructional information, these checklist functions for people to understand what is required and the difference between the datums is really important information to have on the permit. Again, the checklist function. So unfortunately, I'm not really building a really new cool house out here in Lawrence. That would be cool though. So I don't have a developer actually going out and surveying a site, but what we do have is the Kansas base flood elevation portal. So here you can request base flood elevations for approximate A zones where we have base level engineering. So you can get a base flood elevation that way, but there's also LiDAR value. So all you need to do is find your location. You use the drawing tools to draw a polygon as close as possible to your building footprint, and then it will tell you what the LiDAR value is. So it's not survey accurate, but it can give you a really good idea of the elevation that someone's property is at and whether or not it might be a good candidate for a LOMA. So I need to check this BFE and make sure that the contractor has done it correctly. So I definitely going to use the flood insurance, either floodway data tables, if that's applicable, or the flood profiles for a stream or a river. For a lake or reservoir, you want to use the still water data tables in the flood insurance study. So the base flood elevations on the firm are rounded to a whole number. So we need to get a little more precise than that. And so the data tables, the floodway data tables are within 1/10 of a foot. And of course, you can calculate just as closely with the profiles. So this data should be consistent and you should arrive at the same answer regardless of if you use the profile or the floodway data table. So since I have digital data, I will be calculating this in a GIS. It's basically the same process on a paper map. You'll just be using a ruler instead of digital measuring tools. So what you want to do is draw a line parallel to the stream, or in this case, the stream profile baseline, which is one of the shape files that comes in the National Flood Hazard Data layer when you download it and put it in your GIS. So I've got the upstream most corner of the structure, because remember this flow is from north to south up to the Kansas River, because it's just a small tributary. So if you are doing this in GIS, you want to be aware of projection because that can alter your measurements. Here I'm in a Kansas datum, which is appropriate for the location that we're in. So I've got my horizontal line as close to parallel to that stream profile baseline as possible. And now I'm measuring from my upstream cross section to that line where it intersects the profile baseline. So I've measured a distance of 21 feet from cross section C. So now I know approximately where my site is. So I've pulled up the correct profile. Flood insurance study profile. So there's profiles for every stream in that community. So I've flipped to the page of Brook Street tributary because that's where my site is. And I know I'm between B and C, which is why I have that arrow pointing here. So the profile baseline direction of flow is usually downstream from right to left. So you're reading upstream from left to right, which is kind of what we want to do, is go left to right. So it's good to be aware of that. And we've got our legend in the right-hand bottom corner that tells you all of the different stream intervals that are mapped out, where the stream bed is, and your cross-section locations. So when I calculate this base flood elevation, it should be somewhere between the two cross-section values. If I get a number that's outside 825.4 or 826.1, I should definitely check my work because something is wrong. So I really need to pinpoint my location now. So I've zoomed in on this area between B and C where my site is. So horizontally, we have 10 squares. So these profiles are usually in 10 by 10 square grids. It's between 400 and 800 horizontally along the x-axis. So I know I have 10 squares. I have a 40-foot interval between each square. So I need to measure 21 feet downstream of cross-section C using these 40-foot interval squares. And just for your information, they're usually 1 inch. So I have that measurement on there. So I've done my best to try to get 21 feet downstream of cross-section C. It's not completely exact, but it's definitely very close. So cross-section C itself is not on a grid line. It's a little bit over. So I've done my best to try to get about halfway through that distance, like half a square, as in 20 feet. So I've used my PDF measuring tool to try to get that as precise as possible, 0.025 inches. And so just to double check everything, I went ahead and just measured the distance between the two cross sections. So in GIS, it's 160 feet, which is 0.4 inches. So I've measured that on the profile and it checks out because it never hurts to just double check everything. So I've done my best to get my site as close as possible as I can to 21 feet downstream of cross section C. So I just take that line and I draw it all the way up. I just pulled it all the way up straight through all of the different flood intervals. So I just carried up, and then using the legend, I find the 100-year base flood. So it's the second line down that is the long dash with two shorter dashes in between. And I've marked right where that intersection is. I've circled it, and then I just draw a line through that intersection as close as possible, all the way through to the other side. So the y-axis shows the elevation, and so it's also 10 squares, but you can see the interval is just slightly different. So 10 squares here is 5 feet, so 2 squares is 1 foot. So I've just put my BFE at 826.1 because it's pretty low on that square. It looks like my line might be even a little high, so it's just really low on that square, but it's right above 826, so I put 826.1, which is consistent with my cross-section value, and it makes sense because my site is so close to cross-section C when you consider that B is 160 feet down, and I'm only 20 feet down, and the difference between those two cross-sections is only like 0.7 feet. So it's reasonable. So you want to make sure that all the elevation information that you've been provided is correct, and you check their license. So there's the Kansas State Board of Technical Professionals, so you can search their license and just don't assume anything you've been given is correct. So check the entire elevation certificate. It says ABD, but also definitely C, because C is your elevation information, really important. Your diagram, really important. So make sure all of that is correct. And in Kansas, only an engineer or a surveyor can sign an elevation certificate or fill it out. So just make sure there's no architects. And yeah, one other important thing is make sure they're using the correct version. So currently, the current version expires November 30th, 2022. So section G here, so I've signed it. I've been approved, just based on the construction drawings, as long as what I build stays compliant. So there's also, other important information here about substantial improvements. It goes back over the freeboard requirements, all this important information. Ooh, sorry, there's some feedback. Okay, that's better. Sorry. And one other important thing that could go in here and be helpful is that by signing this, you agree to give the community official access to do inspections. So that's an important thing. Having this permission to go on site and do your inspections and really get in there and make sure everything is compliant. That's important to have. And it gives you permission to do that. So about inspections, optimally, you'll do 3. Realistically, maybe you'll only be able to do 1 or 2. So you want to ensure that proposed plans are being followed, that accurate technical information was submitted. So if you only get to do 1 inspection, inspection number 2 will be the most important when they're putting in the lowest floor, because when it's being put in, they could maybe correct it if it's not at the right elevation. So the first one, you want to verify that the plan is consistent with the ground. So you want to go out there after the site has been staked out, so that you can check that there's no unauthorized floodway encroachments that's not supposed to be there. And you can check the location of existing and proposed infrastructure elements. So again, inspection 2, when the lowest floor is going in, check the elevation on that the foundation type is correct, and that they're putting in what they told you they were going to put in. You can probably check flood openings at this point. And inspection 3 is at excuse me, is at or near completion of the project. So you want to make sure that the fill meets the standards, that there's enough flood openings, they haven't covered the flood openings, that the equipment and machinery is properly elevated. That's really important. Anchoring systems on manufactured home, that kind of thing. So after this, you'll want to come back and conduct periodic inspections to ensure that no non-compliant modifications have been made. Yeah. So yeah, I finished quite a bit early. Good. So please let me know if you need a certificate for this class. Just send me an email and I'll be happy to get that out to you as soon as possible. And for permit determinations, I have Janelle Phillips' information here.
Thank you, Cheyenne. I enjoyed your flood profile demonstration on how to use the FIS book. So we can open it up. We can have, there aren't any questions in chat, but if anybody would like to just take themselves off mute and ask a question, now is the perfect time for it. And you can also type question in chat. I'll watch the chat. So right before we started this, one of the people that signed up for the class, her name's Kelly, hope she's still on the line, was talking to me about a development that's going to happen in her area. And Kelly emailed some plans and things to me. And Kelly, I'll be happy to take a phone call from you, but just to help out the rest of the class here, I want to bring up a couple of things that you mentioned in your email. There are going to be some ag buildings. There's going to be some new buildings. There's going to be some parking lots and some things like that. And there's going to be some shacks for concession stands and an animal education barn and so on. So it's going to be like a countryside event out here. What I would recommend on something like that, Kelly, is that you take that permit and you break it down into pieces. So each building is going to be its own piece and each building should have its own permit form. The parking lots, you can combine those. So parking lots and roadways, especially just going to like gravel in area, temporary, as long as that's at grade, that's a fairly simple permit. You'd fill out the permit form the way Cheyenne showed you, but you don't have to do an elevation certificate for a parking lot at grade. So I'd make the parking areas, I'd combine all of those into one permit form. So a permit form for parking areas, permit form for new buildings, and so on. There are different regulations for agriculture buildings than there are for other buildings, but the definition of an agriculture building in the FEMA guidance talks about the use of the building being specific to agriculture. So if you have a commercial use or you're doing any sales out of there or you have any employees in that building, you can't really call it an agriculture building anymore. And we can send you information on that, Kelly, and I'm going to talk to you more about that on the phone. But the point is, when you have a complicated permit like this, I find that it's easy to break it down in pieces and to permit each piece separately. Cheyenne, you have a question in the chat asking if the PowerPoint will be available?
Yes, sure. Let me know if you'd like a copy of it. I'd be happy to send it out to you.
John Versu asked for that in the chat. So, John, you might shoot her an email. And so, Cheyenne, you were using a sample permit form in your demonstration today. We can email that sample permit form to anybody out there who'd like to see it.
Yes, I have that and any of the websites that I talked about for ESA and that kind of thing. So just let me know.
All right. So so we can also send you that information to anybody who needs it. FEMA requires that communities have a permit form that's in your ordinances or resolutions or codes, whatever you're using in your community. You have floodplain regulations of some kind, and every single floodplain regulation I've ever seen requires permits, but not one of them says what the permit has to look like exactly. So we've got a sample permit which is not required to be followed to the letter. You can modify that sample permit. We've got it as a Word document or a fillable PDF, either one. But it hits all of the good basic high points that a permit needs to hit, although it doesn't cover every single thing. It is hard to have a one-size-fits-all permit for all of the different things that are going to end up in the floodplain.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's where that checklist comes in again, kind of lists everything that might be required for any kind of development. So
Right.
that's nice to have.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, Cheyenne, so I think it's time to wrap it up.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We appreciate it. Yeah, please send me an email for any certificates or any of the other information that you need. Yeah, call or email anytime. Anything floodplain, we're here. And we appreciate you and hope you have a good day.
Well, a lot of people are saying thank you in the chat, Cheyenne.
So thanks everyone. Great.
Bye, everybody. And Kelly, I'll have a follow